All right, good morning. Welcome to Nasdaq IR Insight Live. I'm your host, Will Briganti. We're tuning in here live from the Nasdaq market site overlooking New York City's Times Square. My guest today is Jordan Sachs. He's the head of healthcare listings here at the Nasdaq stock market. Jordan, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Will, thanks for having me back.
Good to have you here. All right, so there's been a lot of momentum in healthcare. We've seen some milestones. We've seen some record number of IPOs, in a single day, for example. Tell our viewers what's going on in the healthcare listings landscape. Bring them up to speed on all of the good things that are happening.
Well, it's a very exciting time for the healthcare listing space.
Yep.
We're seeing the most activity in a long period of time, and that activity is not just a quick window. This is a real momentum story. So we had 39 healthcare listings this year, and
Yep.
we're only halfway through the year.
Right.
So we expect this story to continue. We expect to see more listings post-Labor Day, as well as companies that we're talking to are thinking about 2019 healthcare IPOs. So clearly, when you look at the sector, the companies that have priced so far have all priced, for the most part, within range or above range, and that is making investors that put money into these companies pretty happy. So when those investors do well, and the next round of companies come through, they're very eager to see what's in the pipeline, because that gives them potential opportunity for investment down the road.
Sure. So walk us through some of the factors that are contributing to this momentum. I mean, sometimes when folks look at the capital markets, they see what can be referred to as windows
Sure.
in the IPO market. But it's not just one thing that opens up an IPO window. And with healthcare, there are probably a variety of factors that go into it. Because these companies could be at all stages of their life cycle.
Sure.
So kind of walk our viewers through what some of those factors could be that's driving this momentum.
Sure. There's really three factors.
Yep.
First factor is performance. So the deals have gone out, have performed well, and investors are happy. That's important. The second factor is there's a large amount of investors, I call them crossover investors, and those are investors that invest in both private and public companies who are getting involved in healthcare early on. These healthcare crossover investors are putting their conviction in the company early on so that when they go public, the investor base knows that there's a strong level of support already for this company that may not have a lot of proven science, but at least some very smart crossover investors
Right.
have vetted them and looked interested in the company. So that's driving momentum. It also gives a natural buyer in the IPO aftermarket to be there to support the stock. So we see that trend continuing, and most of the companies that have gone out this year have had a strong crossover investor involved, or multiple crossover investors. So that's the second trend. The third trend really is the technology advancements of science. What's happening in the healthcare, especially when you go into the genome space and
Right.
gene editing, the technology being used today is very different than 20 years ago. And that's driving a lot more information, data, accuracy, and the ability to predict what may or may not work throughout the clinic.
Okay. And in addition to those factors, probably a very favorable regulatory environment, I would imagine.
That's right, and the FDA is really out there saying if you have, they're looking at fast track drug approvals that meet all of the endpoints. So if you have a rare disease
Yeah.
and you can prove to the FDA that you've done all of the clinical milestones, they're very open to looking at these applications. So the companies that are really out there as far as record number of approvals in the FDA is a very encouraging sign.
Yeah.
And I think when you look at the tone that is being set, there really is a desire to help cure some terrible diseases and
Right, of
use the
course.
science to do it.
Okay. Before we get to our final question, what's going on with the Nasdaq Biotechnology Index this year? We've got it up on the wall here.
So the growth of the Nasdaq Biotech Index has been tremendous.
Yeah.
The one thing that's very hard about technology and biotech is that you don't know what's going to work until you go through a long period
Right.
of clinical trials and spend a lot of money. So they call it single stock risk.
Right.
One of the ways to diversify that is to just buy the index. If you have exposure to the index, you're going to have exposure to the entire healthcare momentum and not be just invested in one stock. So we see investors, especially passive investors, continue to look at the biotech index as one way to gain exposure to healthcare without having just one stock in the portfolio.
Sure. Jordan, final question for you. We're going into a bit of a holiday break here. What's your outlook after the July 4th holiday for the rest of the summer?
So we're going to see a little bit of a quiet period now. Late August is a hard time for any IPO.
Sure.
So I think when you get past Labor Day and into September, we are already talking to companies that are confidentially on file
Yeah.
and looking to open up after that window. And I think when you look at the performance of these recent healthcare deals, it's going to create a lot of opportunity for those companies that are confidentially on file in the waiting for the next wave of technology healthcare IPOs.
Awesome. Jordan, we'll leave it there for today.
To be continued.
All right, to be continued. We'll have to come back once the window reopens.
Great. Thanks for having me, Will.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Jordan Sachs. He's head of healthcare listings here at the Nasdaq stock market. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of IR Insight Live. I'm your host, Will Briganti. We look forward to seeing you back on the next program. Thanks so much for tuning in.